Okay, so now it's 2007. You're 35. You're sitting in prison. Terry and Meech, they don't cooperate. They're both facing life in prison. The DEA went after Meech and Terry's dad, went after Pops for money laundering, for money that he had taken to fix different things in the house and so forth, which a lot of people didn't know anything about that could happen. You spending illicit money, you're essentially laundering money. You're taking illegitimate money and making legitimate purchases with it. Mm-hmm. Didn't matter that you didn't participate in the activity that garnered that money. You're now incorporated into the conspiracy to defraud the government.
That's the law.
Right.
People don't know that. That's the law. You are part of that conspiracy now.
That's right. So all those girls who've been taking money for drug dealers all this time, the only girl I ever heard of actually getting arrested for taking money from drug dealers is Chrissy. When they grabbed my man Los back in the days. Welcome home, Los. The Atlanta house was in Pop's name. That trapped him up. They also went after Meech's sister and his nephew. And, now this trial is about to start. So Meech and Terry asked to speak to each other for the first time. And they spoke, they hadn't spoken in a couple of years. Ultimately, they pleaded to running a continuing criminal enterprise or continuing criminal enterprise. Now, I remember shortly after all of this, Meech called me and we were talking, and he said when he initially was brought in to talk to them about what kind of a plea agreement they could get, the agreement was for 20 years. Mm. And then he said, he had to convince Terry to do this because Terry was talking about going to trial. Meech had also shared with me that they had 1,100 hours of Terry on the phone talking about illicit activity. And some of the people he was talking to on those phone calls had cooperated and corroborated what it was that those conversations were actually about, as undisguised as those conversations were. I've heard some of them. It's pretty straightforward. They said everything but, yo, you got the keys, I got the money for the drugs. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is real. So Meech convinces Terry to go with this plea agreement. Okay. Meech said when he gets to the table and it's time to sign this agreement, he looks at the paper and it says 30 years. Mm. And he pushed himself away from the table like they expected him to. Like, what? What the fuck? And he said they opened the door and said, we have a jury convened down the hall. If you're ready to go to trial, we're ready right now. But we have someone who's willing to testify that you purchased 500 kilos of cocaine from them. So, it was a pressure play, power play, that the sister that was actually the head prosecutor for that thing, she's now the big boss, federal attorney's office. Yes. Shout out to Don Ison. Well played.
Yeah. Spellman's sister too.
Well played, sister, and it is a game. Meech and Terry, they plead guilty. Here it is, 2008, year 36. In September 2008, Terry and Meech are sentenced to 30 years in prison for running a nationwide cocaine trafficking ring, which lasted from 2000 to 2005. How did you feel when you heard that Meech and Terry had taken this 30-year plea?
How did I feel when Meech and Terry took that 30-year plea? It's going to sound crazy, but I was like, they didn't get life. Life in the feds ain't 20, 30 years. Life in the feds on your paperwork says deceased. Something in federal prison, when you go to unit team, on your paperwork, it says deceased. If you got life plus 30, if you died and you came back, you'd have 30 more years. It ain't no such thing as, no, life is life in the feds. So in a sense, I was like, man, at least they get to come home, But when everybody got indicted, I didn't think I was indicted. I was like, hey, double jeopardy. They can't charge me for that. That's the ignorance of the law. What you get caught with in one district, unless you get your case locked up where it's all known and unknown crimes in U.S. and U.S. territories, you are open game. If you have possession with the intent to distribute here, you are open game in another district jurisdiction for the conspiracy of that, conspiracy to launder monetary instruments, conspiracy to distribute 5 or more kilos of cocaine. So I felt like I'm glad they didn't get life sentences or something crazy like life plus 30. I thought they could have maybe had better representation, because I think T had fired his lawyer once. I wish they would have. I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I wish they would have. Happy that T is home now. God bless him and his family. I hope that Meech comes home sooner than later. I think he can be a big inspiration to millions of people just like us in the world, and that he can be 10 times more powerful with a different message to people when he gets out than he was when he was one of the biggest drug lords of this century.
I think that's what they're concerned about.
Yeah.
So now you're sitting in prison, and you're doing your time, your 66 months. But then this thing happens, and then they add another 87 months to your sentence. So now you essentially have 153 months, but you only serve 66 months of that sentence. How is it that you only serve 66 months of a 153-month sentence?
Well, at first I was sentenced to 60 months in the Eastern District of Missouri. That case was just me. Actually, the truth, I thought I won. I got caught with all this work, all this money. I only got 60 months. But that was in the Eastern District of Missouri, which is St. Louis. 11 months of some really good time in prison. A guy came to me, literally. It was a Cuban-American dude. He said, "Hey, your name Jabari Hayes?" I said, "Yeah." He had a newspaper. People had newspapers back then. He said, "You've been indicted." I said, "That ain't me." First thing I did, got back, called my lawyer. "Hey, look, man, they said I'm indicted. I'm indicted." My lawyer's like, "Hey, man, I don't know." Then the next day, he was like, "Yeah, you've been indicted." I said, "That's double jeopardy." Ignorance of the law. It's not double jeopardy. You got interstate trafficking in aid of racketeering, which is kind of like possession with the intent to distribute, right? In the Eastern District of Michigan, the conspiracy of that is 2 completely different crimes. So that's how they're able to take another bite at the apple and still be legal. But you think you know the law, you think you studied law, you think you smart, you got all of the sense, but no, they can do it. That's why I was number 9 on the indictment. The first one of, I think it was like 5 superseding indictments, from Jacob Jujula to T to Meech to J-Bo to everybody. Like, when they got everybody, if you counted money, if you rode blunts, if you put work in the cars, if you were a driver, even if you never got caught with nothing, conspiracy, 2 or more people conspire. You don't never have to get caught with 1 penny. You don't have to ever get caught with 1 crumb. But that's the law. Don't get mad at the police or the prosecutors. Congress makes the laws.
That's right. And that particular law was made for the mob.
Yeah. Yep.
So you ended up doing 5.5 years in 19 days.
Yep.
You experienced, as we discussed, a couple of really pivotal moments where you felt like you were relatively scot-free, and then all of a sudden your situation compounded. And, at the point at which, you've been sitting here for a few years, you're still saying, up until your 3rd year in, you're still saying, "Yeah, I'm when I touch down, I'm getting busy." Mm-hmm. Why did it take you so long to come to the conclusion that you didn't want to be involved in the life again?
It took me so long to say and mean it to myself that I wouldn't go back out there and do it again. It took me so long because my first 3 years, my mind was still in the streets. I was still in the clubs. My body was in prison, but my mind and my attitude and everything about me was in the streets. I had plans to do luxury rentals, another money laundering case. I had planned to customize cars. I was going to be building spots, compartments. I had all of these plans, all were leading me back to prison. And after I had been on diesel therapy, where they fly you from Atlanta to Kansas to Terre Haute, Indiana to Oklahoma, you sit there, then you up in Wayne County. They had me on this diesel therapy where I hadn't seen a mirror in 7 months and 3 weeks. I didn't recognize myself when I looked in the mirror. I had lost 40 pounds and I'm a thin guy. During those times, they say you find God in prison. That's a lie. You didn't find God in prison. God was always with you. You just wasn't listening, So I started actually listening, and I started going to service regularly. I even sang in a choir. I made a joyful noise for God. And I started getting back with that network of friends when I was completely legal and I wasn't doing any crimes, and I had to change my circle. I had to change the way I walked. I had to change the way I talked. I had to change my mindset. And I had to get rid of those people in my life that were only going to enhance me going back to prison. And the truth, my son was my biggest inspiration for not going back to prison. He did more for me than I could ever do for him. He gave me something to live for. He gave me something that I knew. Oh, when I was on the streets, I was a great provider, but I was a poor father and a poor husband. I said if I was under a bridge with my son, I would be okay. And he really was the turning point for me, because I couldn't allow him to be out there without that man in his life. I couldn't.
That's right.